I never thought it would come to this. For over 40 years, I had devoted my life to my family. I gave up dreams of a career I was passionate about, put aside my personal aspirations, and sacrificed countless hours just to make sure my son, Alex, had everything he needed. It wasn't always easy, but I thought in the end, the love and care I gave would come back to me in some form. I never imagined I would be left facing the deepest betrayal of my life, not from some stranger, but from my own flesh and blood. It all started when my husband passed away 10 years ago. Grief took a heavy toll on me, but I carried on. I had Alex to look after, and there was no time to wallow. I knew the future would come, one way or another, and I needed to be prepared. That's when I started putting money aside, a small nest egg, a funeral fund. I didn't want to burden anyone when my time came. I didn't want Alex to worry. I kept it in a separate savings account, and I told myself it was the responsible thing to do. I made sure no one knew about it. I wanted it to be there in case I ever needed it, but also, more importantly, for the inevitable day when I'd be gone. Life went on. Alex grew older, went off to college, found his first job, and eventually settled down with a girl named Sarah. I did everything I could to support him. I was his biggest cheerleader, whether it was helping him pay off student loans or just offering a shoulder to lean on when things got tough. My money was always available for him, and I did it gladly. He was my son, after all. But somewhere along the way, things started to change. I started to notice Alex wasn't as close to me as he used to be. At first, it seemed like he was just busy with work or his new life with Sarah. I told myself that's just how it is when kids grow up. But then I started noticing small things. Late-night calls, whispers behind closed doors. There were weeks when I didn't hear from him at all unless he needed something. And more than once, he made comments about how hard it was to make ends meet. It wasn't until one afternoon in the middle of last year that I discovered the truth. I had just come back from the grocery store, bags in hand, when I noticed Alex's laptop open on the kitchen table. It wasn't uncommon for him to leave his things around, but this time, something felt off. A small part of me told me I shouldn't snoop, but my curiosity got the better of me. I took a quick glance at the screen. What I saw made my stomach drop. There it was, a bank transfer notification. It wasn't much at first, a few $100s. I thought it was just a mistake or maybe some online purchase. But as I scrolled, I saw more. Thousands. $12,000 to be exact. The amount I had carefully saved over the years to ensure my funeral expenses would be covered. Alex had taken every last penny of it. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was where that money had gone. A World of Warcraft account. My son had taken my life savings and used it to fund his obsession with a game I had never understood. I stood frozen in place. The room spun around me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had worked so hard, giving up so much of myself to make sure Alex was set for the future. And now, he had stolen from me. Not for something important, not for a real emergency, but to fund an online fantasy world. How could he? How could he betray me like this? The tears came, but they weren't the kind I expected. They weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of disbelief, of rage, of utter helplessness. I had spent my life thinking my son would be the one to care for me when I needed it, that he would be the one to help me when things got hard. But in reality, he had been using me all along. It wasn't the first time either. Alex had always known how to get what he wanted from me, but this time he'd gone too far. I sat there for what felt like hours staring at the computer screen. I couldn't process it. It was like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I wanted to call him, to yell at him, to demand answers. But what good would it do? He'd already made his choice. Finally, I got up, walked to my bedroom, and stared at the envelope where I had kept the papers for the funeral fund. I hadn't touched it in months. I never thought I would need to. But now, looking at it, I realized just how hollow my trust in him had been. He didn't care about me. He didn't care about anything but his own desires. That evening, when Alex came over, I confronted him. I couldn't keep it inside any longer. I asked him about the money. At first, he denied it, tried to play it off as if I was mistaken. But the evidence was irrefutable. I had the bank statements, the transaction history, everything. It was all right there in black and white. And then, the look on his face, a mix of guilt and deflection. He didn't apologize. He didn't seem remorseful. Instead, he tried to explain it away, telling me I shouldn't worry about it because it was just for a game. Just for a game. That was when it hit me. Alex had no idea what he had done to me. He didn't understand the value of what he had taken. He thought I was just some endless resource, there to fund his desires without question. I had been nothing more than a bank account to him, a tool for him to use at his convenience. It was in that moment that I realized something had to change. I had spent my whole life living for others, always putting their needs above my own, but not anymore. I had been blinded by my love for him, and now I had to face the truth. My son had no respect for me, and I wasn't going to let him walk all over me any longer. The trust I had placed in him had been shattered, and I knew then that things would never be the same. After everything came crashing down, I started looking back. I had always known Alex was a bit self-centered, but this betrayal revealed something darker, something deeper than I had ever acknowledged before. The theft of my funeral savings was the final straw, but it was also the revelation that I had been manipulated for years, emotionally, financially, and in ways I couldn't even begin to process. Alex wasn't the man I thought he was. He was using me, and I had allowed it. I had enabled him. I had convinced myself that everything he did was somehow justified because I was his mother, because I loved him. But love, it turns out, doesn't mean you should let someone take advantage of you. Not like this. Not when it comes at the cost of your own well-being. For years, I had been carrying the financial burden of both my and Alex's life. When he first started working after college, I believed the lie he fed me that he was struggling. I didn't question him. I just gave. At first, it was small things. Helping him pay off his car, covering some of his rent when he moved into a new apartment. He'd always tell me it was temporary, that he would pay me back when he was more financially stable, but it never stopped. Each time, the amounts grew larger, the requests more frequent, and my own savings dwindled without me even realizing it. Looking back, I can see now how expertly Alex had played the game. He knew how to manipulate me, how to make me feel guilty. I thought I was helping him grow, teaching him responsibility. But in reality, I was being bled dry. And I never even noticed until it was too late. There were moments when I felt uneasy, but I brushed them off. I thought to myself, he's my son, he's family, he needs me. And isn't that what being a parent is about? But now, as I sat there in my living room after confronting him about the stolen money, I realized just how much I had been blinded by the idea of being a good mother, a mother who always put her son first. He had known exactly how to exploit that. I had been a wellspring of resources, and he had learned early on that he could tap into it at any time. The worst part wasn't just the money. It wasn't even the betrayal. What hurt the most was realizing how little Alex had ever considered me. In all those years, I had never once heard him ask how I was doing. Not truly. There was no genuine concern, no reciprocal support. He'd occasionally ask how I was feeling, but it was always as a way to get something, whether it was money or just a place to crash when things didn't go his way. I'd lend a hand because I thought he needed it, but in reality, it was just a way to keep him comfortable in his own world, while I was left scrambling to make ends meet. I also realized, painfully, that I had been enabling him to remain stagnant, to never grow up. Instead of encouraging him to be responsible, to learn the value of hard work and perseverance, I had been handing him the answers, the money, the security, everything he needed to avoid facing the realities of life. And why? because I wanted to be a good mother, because I wanted to believe that if I gave him everything he wanted, he would eventually realize what mattered most: family, love, respect. But it wasn't just the financial aspect. Alex had started to manipulate me emotionally, too. There was always this undertone of guilt in his voice when he asked for things. "You know I'm struggling, Mom," he would say, even when I knew he wasn't. "I don't want to ask, but I don't have anyone else to turn to." He knew exactly how to make me feel like the worst mother in the world if I said no. And so, I didn't say no. I couldn't. The guilt would be too much. It was a slow erosion of my sense of self, piece by piece. He had played me like a fiddle, and I had let him. Each time I thought I was doing the right thing, being the good mother who sacrifices for her child. But in reality, I had been doing nothing more than feeding into his dependence, making him feel entitled to my resources and my life. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I had spent decades trying to fix things for him, trying to make his life easier, all the while neglecting my own needs, my dreams, my financial security. I had made sacrifices for his benefit, and all along, he had been taking it all for granted. As I sat there, replaying every conversation, every moment when I had given in to his requests, I felt sick. But more than anything, I felt foolish. Foolish for believing that love meant endless giving. Foolish for never questioning the toll it was taking on me. Foolish for thinking he would ever appreciate it. I knew I had to stop enabling him. I had to stop being his safety net, his crutch. He was capable of standing on his own 2 feet, but I had been preventing him from doing so. I had allowed him to believe that no matter what, I would always be there to fix things for him. But not anymore. That was the moment I decided to stop being manipulated, to stop being used. I wasn't going to be the woman who kept sacrificing herself for someone who would never appreciate it. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let him take it from me anymore. It was time to take back control of my life. No more enabling, no more giving in. It was time to put myself first for once. The day I discovered Alex had stolen my funeral savings was the breaking point. But it wasn't until later that I fully understood how far I had fallen into his web of manipulation. That was when it all clicked, and it became crystal clear. I had been living my life for him, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally, and physically. For years, I had been sacrificing every ounce of my energy, my savings, my dreams, just to keep him happy, just to ensure he never had to face any of the consequences of his own actions. And what did I get in return? A betrayal so cruel, I could hardly believe it. When I sat down to confront Alex about the missing money, it was like something inside me snapped. His response was so cold, so indifferent, I could barely recognize him. Instead of showing remorse, he brushed it off. He claimed I was overreacting, that the money was just sitting there and I would never need it. He said it was just a game, that it didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But it wasn't just the money. It was everything he had taken from me. My time, my trust, my self-respect. I realized in that moment that I had been a pawn in his game for far too long. I wasn't going to be that woman anymore, the one who let herself be used, who stood by silently while her son bled her dry, both financially and emotionally. I was done being the enabler. I was done being the one who bent over backward to make everyone else comfortable, even at the expense of my own well-being. The hardest part was admitting it to myself. I had been living my life entirely for him, making endless sacrifices, ignoring my own needs because I thought it was what I was supposed to do as a mother. It was my job, my duty, to make sure he never felt hardship, never faced real consequences. But in doing so, I had made him entitled, selfish, and frankly, disrespectful. He had taken everything I had to give without ever giving anything back. And I had let him. I had allowed him to take my savings, my health, my peace of mind. I had enabled him to become exactly the kind of person I never wanted him to be. As I stood there staring at him in disbelief, I felt this fire ignite in my chest. I realized that I could not go on like this. For so long, I had been living in fear of upsetting him, of making him angry or disappointed in me. But now I saw it for what it was, a manipulation tactic. He was playing on my guilt, on my love for him. And that was where I had gone wrong. I had allowed him to control me by making me feel as though I had no other choice but to keep giving, to keep sacrificing, but no more. No longer would I put my life on hold for him. No longer would I allow him to drain me dry while he sat comfortably in his fantasy world. It wasn't just the money. It was everything. I had spent decades of my life working to build a future for us both. And he had spent those same decades taking, without giving a single ounce of appreciation or respect. It was time to take my life back. It was time to stop making excuses, stop rationalizing, stop thinking that things would change if I just kept giving. I had been wrong all along. The love I thought I was giving him wasn't love at all. It was enabling. It was codependency. And it had to stop. I stood there, my hands trembling, heart pounding in my chest. But a quiet resolve settled over me. I wasn't just angry, I was done. This betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about years of being used and manipulated by the one person I had thought I could trust the most. And I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. With a deep breath, I made my decision. I would no longer tolerate his behavior. I was done enabling him. I was done being his emotional crutch, his financial backup plan. I was done putting him before myself, before my own needs, before my own future. I was going to reclaim my life, my peace, my dignity. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I couldn't keep going down the same path, letting him drag me down with him. I had spent too long sacrificing myself for a son who had never truly appreciated it. Now it was time to do something for me. The first step was confronting him, telling him exactly what I had discovered and exactly how his actions had destroyed not just my savings, but my ability to trust him, to love him without question. The second step was realizing that I had nothing left to give him, and that, for the first time in years, I was going to choose myself over him. It was a painful, heart-wrenching decision, but it was the right one. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me anymore. I was going to stop enabling him. I was going to start living for me. And no matter how hard it was, I would never again let anyone take advantage of my kindness. Not ever again. It was a few days after the confrontation with Alex that the next bombshell dropped. The inheritance. I had known that my mother, who had passed away years ago, had left me a small estate, but I had never imagined how much it would be worth. I had long given up on ever thinking about it, simply letting it sit in the back of my mind. It wasn't much, just a few properties here and there, nothing that seemed to have much value. But when I got the call from the lawyer, everything changed. The news hit me like a wave crashing over me, knocking the breath out of my lungs. The estate had appreciated significantly over the years, and suddenly I was sitting on a small fortune, $12 million to be exact. I couldn't breathe for a moment as I processed it, my hands shaking slightly as I held the letter. It was as if the world had shifted beneath my feet, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long. Hope. I sat in my living room, the weight of the letter heavy in my hands as the reality of it all sank in. I didn't need Alex's manipulation or his demands anymore. For the first time in a long time, I realized that I had everything I needed to take control of my own future. I didn't need to rely on anyone, not even my son, who had, for all intents and purposes, stolen from me and emotionally drained me for years. I was free. The thought of the money was strange to me at first. It was so much more than I had ever expected. But it wasn't just about the money. It was what the money represented. It wasn't just a financial windfall, it was the key to a life of independence. A life where I no longer had to constantly apologize for my existence, to give in to Alex's ever-increasing demands, to feel guilty for wanting something more for myself. I couldn't help but think about how I had spent decades being the caretaker, the provider, the one who made sure everything was in order. I had always put everyone else's needs before my own, sacrificing my time, my health, my peace of mind. I had been a mother, yes, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten how to be a woman with her own desires and ambitions. And now, suddenly, I had the chance to take it all back. I sat in the quiet of my living room, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, as I thought about what I wanted. I thought about what I could finally do for myself. No more paying for Alex's bills or buying him the latest gadgets. No more feeling like I had to pick up the pieces when he made a mess of his life. No more feeling guilty for wanting to live on my own terms. It was almost as if the universe had given me a second chance, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. The money represented freedom, freedom to walk away from a toxic relationship with my son, freedom to pursue my own dreams, freedom to finally live a life where I wasn't always giving, always sacrificing, always putting myself last. I realized then that my mother had given me the greatest gift of all, not just the inheritance, but the ability to stand on my own 2 feet. It had taken me decades to get to this point, but I was finally ready to take control of my life. I was done being the woman who put everyone's needs before her own. I was going to live for me, and the money, though unexpected, was the final push I needed. I knew I had choices now. I could sell the properties, invest the money, and start living in a way that felt true to who I was, not just to the role I had been playing for so long. I didn't have to answer to anyone anymore, not to Alex, not to anyone. The decision was mine and mine alone. I still felt a pang of guilt, thinking of Alex and how he had betrayed me. But that was part of the process, wasn't it? Letting go of the guilt, realizing that I couldn't keep letting him dictate my choices, my happiness. I had spent so many years being afraid of upsetting him, of losing him, of being alone. But in the end, I realized that what I was afraid of most wasn't being alone. It was losing myself, and I had lost enough of myself already. The inheritance was a symbol of something greater, my right to live my life on my own terms. It was the moment I decided that no matter what happened with Alex or anyone else, I was going to live for me. I was going to make decisions based on what was best for me, not out of guilt or obligation. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of excitement about the future. I started making plans. I would invest the money in something that would secure my future. I could travel, buy a home that I loved, maybe even start a new business. The possibilities were endless. And with each passing day, I felt the weight of the past lifting, bit by bit. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew that this was my chance to rewrite the story of my life. I wasn't just going to survive anymore. I was going to thrive. And I was going to do it without Alex or anyone else holding me back. The future was mine, and I was ready to take it. The day I found out about the theft, I thought everything had reached its breaking point. But that was only the beginning. Alex didn't show any remorse. Instead, he tried to twist the whole situation, deny what he had done, and manipulate me even further. It was a few days after I'd discovered what he'd done, draining my funeral fund to spend on his World of Warcraft obsession, that I called him over for a serious conversation. I was done with being a doormat, done with playing into his games, and I was finally ready to face him head on. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd own up to his actions, apologize, and we could work through this. I was wrong. I couldn't have been more wrong. We sat down in the living room. I had already gone over everything: the bank statements, the withdrawal confirmations, the evidence that showed his manipulation of my finances over the years. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, hurt, and ready to confront him, once and for all. "Alex," I said, my voice steady but firm, "you took my money. The money I set aside for my funeral. I trusted you with everything, and this is how you repay me?" He shifted uncomfortably on the couch, his eyes darting toward the floor, but there was no guilt, no remorse in his face. Instead, he opened his mouth to speak, and I could already feel the web of lies beginning to spin. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, looking at me like I was the one losing my mind. "You're overreacting. It was just a few $100, Mom. I needed it for something important. You're acting like I took the whole thing." I could feel the blood rushing to my face. "A few $100? Alex, do you think I'm stupid? I've been going through my bank records. It's not just a few hundred, it's thousands of dollars. All of it was meant for my funeral, and you used it for that ridiculous game of yours." He didn't even flinch. Instead, he crossed his arms, an all too familiar smug look creeping onto his face. "I don't get why you're so upset," he continued, his tone dismissive. "I was just helping you. You don't need that money right now. Besides, who cares about a funeral fund anyway? It's not like you're going anywhere anytime soon." I felt like I had been slapped in the face. How could he say something like that? How could he be so cold, so dismissive of everything I had worked for? All these years, I had been trying to teach him responsibility, trying to show him the importance of saving for the future. And this is how he responded, by treating my savings like it was his to waste? "Helping me?" I asked, my voice rising now, unable to hold it back anymore. "Do you think this is helping me? You stole from me, Alex. You stole my security, my peace of mind. And for what? A stupid game that you could have done without? You've taken enough from me, my time, my money, my trust, and I'm done." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or was it just annoyance? He shifted on the couch again, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't steal from you, Mom," he said, his voice turning defensive. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. You're just old and paranoid, that's all. I didn't do anything wrong. You're just looking for a reason to complain." That was it. That was the moment I realized that Alex wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to admit his wrongdoings. In fact, he wasn't even going to acknowledge the pain he had caused. He was too far gone, wrapped up in his own world, to care about the consequences of his actions. His response wasn't one of remorse, but of denial, of trying to deflect blame and place the responsibility on me. I took a deep breath and shook my head. "You're not going to get away with this, Alex. I'm not going to be gaslighted into thinking I'm the one in the wrong here. You took my money, and now you're going to pay for it." Alex let out a frustrated sigh. "You're just being dramatic. No one cares about this. It's just money." But I knew that wasn't the point anymore. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust. It was about the betrayal I had felt. He had been manipulating me for years, subtly pulling strings, and I had been too afraid to notice. But now, I saw it clearly. Every time I gave him money, every time I allowed him to live in my house rent-free, I was feeding into his sense of entitlement, his belief that he could take whatever he wanted and I would just accept it. I stood up, my hands trembling, but my resolve unshakable. "You can deny it all you want, but I'm done, Alex. I'm done being the one you use, the one you manipulate. You are not going to get away with this. You may have thought I wouldn't notice, but I see everything now, and I'm done letting you take advantage of me." Alex's expression shifted then, from anger to something more like frustration. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, his voice low. "You're throwing away everything we had over a little bit of money." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth had already come out, and I wasn't going to let him twist it anymore. As I turned and walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The confrontation was painful, but it was also freeing. I had faced him. I had called him out on his lies and manipulation, and I was no longer afraid to stand up for myself. I was done enabling Alex. I was done pretending that everything was okay. And no matter how much he tried to deny it, I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same between us again. When Alex realized that his manipulations weren't going to work, that I wasn't going to roll over and let him get away with this, he did what any cornered person might do. He tried to save face by publicly attacking me. This time, however, he took things to a whole new level, using the same platforms I had trusted for years. His goal wasn't just to get me to forgive him, it was to ruin me, make me seem like the crazy one, the one who couldn't be trusted. I had no idea he'd been plotting this, but within days, there were posts popping up on social media. At first, it was just a few vague messages. "I don't know what's happening to my mom. She's not the woman I thought she was." But then it escalated. Alex went full throttle, posting long rants on his Instagram, telling anyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable, that I had lost it, that I was accusing him of things I was making up in my head. He painted himself as the victim, claiming I was emotionally abusive, that I was overbearing and controlling. And now I was accusing him of stealing. The nerve? The audacity. I couldn't believe what I was reading. He had gone so far as to share fabricated stories, claiming that I had been trying to manipulate him for money all these years. He said I had been hoarding money and made him feel guilty for not giving me what I wanted. I knew then that he was trying to twist everything, to turn everyone against me. I felt an immediate rush of anger and betrayal again. This wasn't just the son I had raised, the boy I had tried to instill good values in. This was a stranger, someone willing to tear me down in public to cover up his mistakes. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, but I knew I couldn't let it stand. At first, I didn't know how to respond. I had never wanted to engage in drama, especially not online. But I couldn't let Alex control the narrative. I couldn't let him destroy everything I had worked for, everything I had done for him. The thought of him using his social media platforms to tarnish my reputation made me sick to my stomach. But I knew I had to act quickly. I gathered everything: the bank statements, the wire transfer confirmations, the screenshots of his social media posts that showed the lies he'd been spreading. I even managed to get a recording of one of our conversations, where he admitted to taking the money for the game. I wasn't going to let him paint me as a liar. I immediately contacted my lawyer and explained everything. The last thing I wanted was to drag my personal life into court, but what Alex had done was slanderous. It was defamation, and I couldn't sit back and let him ruin me. I had worked hard all my life, and I wasn't about to let a single post or story tarnish my name. It wasn't long before my lawyer filed for a defamation suit. Once that went public, Alex's social media campaign backfired. His followers, many of whom had been passive bystanders, started questioning the validity of his claims. People I hadn't even heard of reached out to me, offering their support and saying they could see through his lies. They had been following his rants, and they knew something wasn't right. The tables had turned, and now Alex was the one on the defensive. As the legal battle began, the real consequences for Alex started to unfold. He couldn't hide behind his keyboard anymore, couldn't pretend that his actions didn't have real-life repercussions. In one of the court hearings, he tried to downplay everything, claiming that it was just a family disagreement. But my lawyer tore apart his defense, showing how his lies had led to financial harm, not just to me, but to my reputation. The judge saw through his manipulation, and Alex, who had once been so confident in his ability to talk his way out of anything, started to falter. His credibility was slipping, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Meanwhile, I began receiving phone calls from people who had once been his friends, people who had witnessed his behavior for years, but were too afraid to speak out. They told me how Alex had always been selfish, how he had used them too, and how they'd felt guilty for not standing up sooner. My lawyer told me that these people were crucial, and their testimony would help my case. But then the real shock came. Alex's social media accounts, which had been central to his smear campaign, started to see a significant decline in followers. The posts he had made began to disappear. It turned out many of his followers were appalled by his actions, and the platforms had started investigating his posts for harassment and defamation. In a matter of days, Alex's accounts were suspended, and his audience was gone. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Alex's lies were unraveling. His online presence, the very thing he had used to manipulate me and others, was crumbling. I was no longer the victim of his narrative. He was now the one who had to answer for what he had done. The legal proceedings weren't over yet, but the damage to Alex's reputation was already done. For once, I felt like I had the upper hand. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about taking back control of my life, of ensuring that Alex would never be able to manipulate me or anyone else again. I wasn't going to let his cruelty go unanswered. The public didn't know the full story, but they would soon. And when they did, I was going to be the one standing tall, with the truth on my side. At this point, I had reached a breaking point. Alex's lies, his manipulation, the way he had tried to tear me down with no remorse. It all came to a head. But there was one more thing I had to do. Something that would show him, once and for all, that there were real consequences to his actions. Alex's obsession with World of Warcraft had been a constant source of frustration for me, even long before the theft of my funeral fund. I had watched for years as he poured hours into that game, as if it was more important than real life, more important than anything that truly mattered. And now, here he was, using my hard-earned money, my retirement savings, to fund his digital fantasy world, while I struggled to keep my feet under me. I had never been a gamer. I didn't understand the allure of sitting in front of a computer screen for hours, pretending to be someone you weren't. But I had always supported Alex's hobbies. I tried to understand, to be patient. I even made him his favorite snacks while he played or watched the game's live streams. I had hoped he would outgrow it, that he would mature, take responsibility for his life. But instead, it only got worse. As the years went by, he became more and more withdrawn, more isolated, his obsession growing to a point where it consumed him entirely. When I found out he had used my funeral savings for the game, I knew it was time to take action. He had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let him off the hook. I knew that destroying his world, the one he valued above everything else, would be the ultimate consequence. He had stolen from me, taken advantage of me in ways I couldn't have imagined, and it was time for him to realize that actions like his didn't go unpunished. It didn't take long to figure out where his prized gaming equipment was. I had known that his gaming setup was his life, his pride and joy. His expensive PC, the one he spent hours tweaking, upgrading, and fawning over. It was his way of escaping reality. A reality that he had turned into a virtual game. A reality that didn't include any real responsibilities or consequences. But that was all about to change. One afternoon, when I knew Alex would be out running errands, I took a deep breath and walked into his room. His gaming rig was sitting there, glowing with the faint lights of a system that had cost more than my car. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me as I stared at it. The feeling was cathartic. I knew what I was about to do was a moment I would never forget. I grabbed the hammer from the garage, the one I used for DIY projects, and walked back into his room. My hands were shaking, but this wasn't fear. It was the realization that this was my turning point. I was done being afraid of him. I was done being the victim in his little game. He had taken so much from me, used me for his own gain, and now it was my turn to take back control. With a swift motion, I brought the hammer down onto the side of the PC. The sound was jarring. The hard plastic cracking, the metal casing denting. I could feel the satisfaction of each strike. I wasn't just destroying a machine. I was destroying everything Alex had taken from me. My trust, my dignity, my years of hard work. It was a symbolic moment, breaking his world apart, the one he had chosen to value more than his own mother. I didn't stop there. The next thing I did was delete his World of Warcraft account. I didn't know the specifics of how to do it, but I figured it out. The account was tied to his email, and once I had access to it, it was only a matter of clicking the right buttons. The thought of him being unable to log into his beloved game was an overwhelming feeling of triumph. It was as if I was taking back some power, some piece of myself that I had lost over the years of taking care of him and enabling his behavior. As I hit the final confirm button on the account deletion screen, a sense of finality washed over me. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was me reclaiming my life. For once, I wasn't the one being manipulated. I was the one in control. When Alex came home later that day, I could see the confusion on his face as soon as he walked into his room. The PC was in pieces, and the glow of the screen was gone. I didn't even flinch as I watched him stand there, staring at the destruction, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief. "Why did you do this?" he demanded, his voice full of anger and shock. "That's my life. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, feeling the strength of my resolve solidify. "You took from me, Alex. You took something that you didn't deserve. Now, I'm taking back what's mine." His face twisted in rage, but there was nothing he could say. This time, I wasn't backing down. I had put up with his lies, his manipulation, his emotional blackmail for far too long. It was over. This was the consequence for his actions. And I made sure he understood that there would be no more second chances. As he stormed out of the room, yelling threats and accusations, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what he would do or say. I had finally taken control of my life again. His digital world was gone, and I was free. The broken PC and deleted account were just symbols of the destruction of his power over me. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe again. It wasn't just the destruction of Alex's gaming rig that felt like a victory. It was what came after. I had finally cut the cord. For so long, I had been tied to him, to his needs, to his manipulations. But as I stood there in the silence of my now empty home, I realized that my life had taken on a new direction, one that didn't revolve around his demands. It was the beginning of something new, something that was entirely about me for once. The weight that had been sitting on my shoulders for years began to lift, piece by piece. I had spent decades putting his needs before my own. I had sacrificed my career, my social life, my health, everything, to make sure he was comfortable. And for what? To have him steal from me? To manipulate me emotionally and financially, only to be cast aside once he no longer had any use for me? No, I wasn't going to let that define my life anymore. It was time to leave. I had known it for a while, but the moment I let go of Alex's toxic influence, it became clear. I needed to walk away from everything that tied me to him, to my old life. I wasn't just leaving a house or a city. I was leaving behind a part of myself that I no longer recognized. The version of me who lived in fear, who catered to his every whim, who always put others before herself. That woman was gone. I made the decision that very day to find a new place to live. I didn't need anything grand or extravagant. I didn't want to keep up appearances anymore. I just wanted peace. I wanted a space where I could breathe, where I could finally be alone with my thoughts and start building a life that I controlled. I needed somewhere that was mine, a place where I could relax and rebuild from the emotional wreckage of my past. The first place I looked at was a modest 2-bedroom cottage by a lake, tucked away from the hustle and bustle. It wasn't anything fancy, but it felt right. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel the calm wash over me. It was a far cry from the chaos of my former home, and the silence was exactly what I had needed. The peace of the surrounding nature, the quiet hum of the water. It was a stark contrast to the tense, toxic atmosphere I had left behind. As I signed the lease and made plans to move in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. For the first time in a long time, I was making a choice based on what I wanted. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't worrying about what Alex would think or how he would react. This was for me. The move was surprisingly smooth. I sold most of my furniture, things that I didn't need or wanted anymore, and started fresh. I brought only the essentials, a few old family photos, some clothes, a couple of books. The rest of my life was behind me, and I wasn't going to drag it with me. I even let go of the guilt that had always been tied to my relationship with Alex. The guilt that I should have done more, that I should have been a better mother, that somehow I had failed. But no longer. That was a burden I wasn't going to carry any longer. When I finally arrived at my new home, I stood in front of the door for a moment, taking it all in. The cottage felt like a blank slate, and I felt lighter, as if I could finally begin again. No more being held back by anyone. No more manipulation. Just me, this peaceful place, and the opportunity to rediscover who I was. The house was small, but I loved it. The big windows let in plenty of light, and the view of the lake was calming. I spent hours unpacking and organizing, something I hadn't done in ages, simply because I had never had the space or energy for it before. There was no rush, no pressure. It was all on my terms. I started taking walks by the lake, watching the seasons change, and realizing how much I had missed in my years of catering to Alex's needs. I found joy in the simple things, in quiet moments, in doing things just for me, like reading a book without interruption, cooking a meal without having to ask for anyone's approval. But it wasn't just about finding peace in my surroundings. I also began to reconnect with parts of myself that had been neglected. I took up gardening, something I had always wanted to do but had never had the time for. I started painting again, a hobby I had abandoned years ago. Slowly, I was rediscovering the passions and joys that had been buried under years of living for others. And as I sat on the porch one evening, looking out over the lake as the sun set, I realized how much strength it had taken to get to this point. The woman who had allowed herself to be manipulated, who had sacrificed everything for someone who never cared for her, was gone. In her place was a woman who was ready to embrace the future, to live life on her own terms, without apologies. This new chapter was mine to write, and I was ready to live it fully. After everything with Alex, I realized the inheritance wasn't just about me. I wanted to turn the pain into something meaningful. I researched charities that help the less fortunate and decided to donate my entire inheritance. Writing that check brought me peace. No longer was the money tied to regret. It was my way of moving forward, making a positive impact, and leaving my past and Alex behind for good.